Once you get a taste of it, you cannot have enough of pornography. Once you get a taste of it, you cannot have enough of pornography. Once you get a taste of it, you cannot have enough.
I'm trying to stop, but it's hard to stop, you know, I just can't give it up.
Pornography, yeah. I'm addicted.
I'm addicted to pornography.
Addicted to pornography. Very addicted to pornography.
You gotta be addicted to something, you wanna be addicted to porno.
Try to kick it, you know, but you can't, dude. The urge is just taking you over.
It's like cigarettes.
Good.
It's like alcohol.
I'll never stop. I'll be an old man with 50 kids still watching pornos. I mean, it's all good.
Oh, I'm addicted. I'm an addict.
I watch sex at least 3 times, 4 times a day.
I'm addicted. I love it.
Have you ever tried to stop?
I try. It's just so hard.
It's like cigarettes.
I'm addicted. It's like alcohol.
It teaches some weird type of shit you want to try out with your girl. You're like, hey, baby, you want to try this
You
out?
wanna know how to treat a woman right, you gotta take pornography.
About everything I know as far as sex goes, you know, you learn it all from pornography.
Basically, where I learned everything about the women is from pornos.
It tells you what turns them on and what turns them off.
You know, you watch something like that, and you sometimes you realize what girls really want.
What does it teach you about women?
That they're weak. They're lame.
I don't think of them as objects because you see them on the screen getting.
They're lame.
I've learned that from pornography. You see a few things on the screen you might want to try.
You watch these things and you go, I want to do them, I want to do them. And you know what? Sometimes you can't do them and you can't deal with it. So you say, okay, I'm going to go do it and I'm going to do it my way.
That's why pornos are bad. It gets in your mind. It's like you want to go out and do it, but something, you know, back here, it's like, yo, does it hold you back, you know? You want to do it, but you don't. I mean, he did it once. There's something. It's like you want to go out and do it.
On the screen you might want to try.
When you hear these men talking about pornography, the things they say seem almost unbelievable. But if you listen, it's clear that these guys are only demonstrating exactly what social scientists have been finding. Pornography does, in fact, affect the male attitude towards sex, and especially towards women. And because hardcore pornography has now become so mainstream and legitimized, some men don't even mind talking about it on camera. There is no arguing the fact that pornography is a hotly debated issue in America today. On the one hand, there are those who believe pornography is harmful to their community and should be censored, which of course offends those who believe that any censorship violates freedom of speech, a freedom we as Americans hold dear. Widening the divide even further was the controversial interview with serial killer Ted Bundy.
And the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
Bundy's claim that pornography influenced his behavior ignited a huge debate over whether there is a cause and effect relationship between pornography and sexual violence. Today, pornography is more pervasive than ever, from the neighborhood video store to your home computer. When did it all start? Up until the 50s, pornography was shunned, a back alley taboo. But in 1953, something happened that would challenge and ultimately change the way Americans felt about sexually explicit material.
If you want to talk about what happened in the pornography industry, we have to point to the later months of 1953 when Playboy hit the stands. And what happened is Playboy changed the nature of pornography in the Western world. Prior to Playboy, pornography was the under-the-counter, low class. It had an image of being associated with low class males, and any male who wanted to buy it was ashamed about buying it. It was in a brown paper bag. He had to find outlets for it. What Hugh Hefner did in December 1953 when he introduced pornography into the market was he made it respectable. He gave it an upper middle class aura, and he did this very purposely. When you read about Playboy and you read about Hefner and how he intended to sell Playboy, he sold it as a lifestyle magazine, but as an upper middle class lifestyle magazine. So what he says, for example, in the first Playboy in 1953 was, the Playboy enjoys his cocktails, he likes to listen to music, he likes to talk about philosophy, he likes Picasso. This was a coded way of saying that the new playboy, the new guy who consumes pornography, is no longer this low-class guy who scurries in dirty passages or dirty alleyways. What he is this upper middle-class male who will consume this magazine which tells him how to dress, what to wear, what to buy, what to eat, and also the pictures. And the pictures were tagged on in selling it to the reader, because the reader did not want to see himself as a pornography user. The reader wanted to see himself as an upwardly mobile male who would consume this magazine in order to know how to have the Playboy lifestyle. And what happened between 1969 and 1974 was a battle between Playboy and Penthouse of who could produce the most explicit magazine. Penthouse won. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, the end of that sort of war between the two magazines was 1974, the very time that Hustler published their first issue. And it's no accident, because what the battle between Playboy and Penthouse did in terms of opening up the pornography was it pushed the limits of what was acceptable and what was acceptable to be distributed through the mainstream channels. And so you could buy it in kiosks, you could buy it in airports. Prior to the 60s, you couldn't do that. And that's what has made it such a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. So Playboy, Penthouse and Hustler, together as a group, worked to push the limits of what's acceptable. Without these key people, you would not have the industry you've got today. They laid the legal, the economic and the cultural groundwork for this multi-billion-dollar industry we now have.
Since the late 1970s, the pornography industry has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar-a-year business. They have exploited every form of communication there is in order to take it out of the back alley and bring it directly into your home. 90% of all neighborhood video stores have a section for soft and hardcore pornography tapes. Cable and satellite deliver pornography directly to the home. A new trend in the adult bookstore industry is the large outlet chain store, usually in the heart of a suburban neighborhood.
Behind me is an 18,000 square foot porn store called Castle Superstore. Castle boasts that it's going to have 500 stores nationwide in the next 5 years. And they say that they're mainstreaming pornography to the public.
The internet has made all types of hardcore and illegal pornography available to anyone with a computer and a modem.
Well, we did this survey a year and a half ago with MSNBC. It was the biggest survey ever done with internet sexuality, and we found a number of very important findings. One of the findings was the significant percentage of people who were developing sexual problems in their online sexual usage. And this had never been quantified before. And what we found was that 1%, in a very conservative definition of people, had very serious problems with online sexual compulsivity or addiction. And up to 15% of people had some degree of problems with their online sexual usage. Now, even the conservative definition of 1%, when you think about 20 million people in the US go online for sexual pursuits, 1% of that is 200,000 people with severe sexual problems with the internet. We think that's an epidemic. It's an epidemic that's unrecognized, and it's something that really needs attention.
I'll be at my house and my little brother's on the computer, and he'll be sending stuff back and forth to people that he meets, and you see some pretty crazy stuff on there.
I think the problem with the internet and what makes it more of a concern around issues like pedophilia is that these people form their own virtual communities online. So it's hard for pedophiles to find each other right now. But on the internet, there are places that they can go, and there are groups that they belong to on the internet where they can trade information, they can trade pictures, they can trade tips, and they also form a virtual community, which means that they insulate themselves further from larger societal values. So they can say, you know what, this is good, those guys are all picking on us, this isn't a problem, back in Greece they did this all the time, and that insulates them and protects them. It makes them more difficult to treat, more difficult to break through the denial, and for them to see it's a problem because they have this community that's supporting their views.
And on the computer, you can get a lot of shit.
Pictures of 14-year-olds.
Yeah, oh, definitely even younger.
You know, people ask, why is the internet so powerful around sexuality? And we think that it's something that we call the AAA engine, which has to do with access. It's there 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, whenever you have an itch. Affordability, you know, the internet is such a vast thing that there's supply and demand. You can get all kinds of sexual pictures and all kinds of stuff for free. And the third A is anonymity. So people engage in all kinds of things that they wouldn't do anywhere else. They wouldn't do these behaviors, they wouldn't engage in these behaviors anywhere else. And when you engage in it enough times, there's a concern about whether it desensitizes you to it and whether you're more likely to then take it offline and engage in it offline.
What's on the internet? What's available?
It's everything, dude, from child pornography to straight up whips, flamethrowers, bestiality. It's out there. It's out there.
Have you seen child pornography?
Yeah, you can say that.
You know, again, kids are on the internet and they go everywhere, and whatever software protection you have on your computer, they defeat it. They're the experts on internet and software, so whatever you try to do, they defeat. And they go everywhere and they see bestiality, they see rape, they see sexual violence, and again, I think it can confuse them.
Oh my gosh, look at those girls!
And I think it can hurt their attitudes about sexuality.
What are the consequences of exposure to hardcore pornography at an early age? We can't answer that question. As a society, we have no idea how this is going to affect our children in the future. Since pornography was first mass merchandised in the 1960s, the effects on adult males have been studied and documented by social scientists, doctors, psychologists, and law enforcement officials. They cite the following as the most common effects. Addiction.
I'm addicted to pornography.
Have you ever tried to quit looking?
No, it's all I mean, I gotta see porn.
Sex miseducation.
Have you learned things about women by looking at porno?
Yeah, they're down for anything no matter what they say. No matter what they say, a girl is down to do it.
Desensitization.
I get less attached to her emotionally and more just down for physical sex.
Conditioning.
It's gotten me into different positions. It's gotten me in a little role playing. Before I saw porn, I was just regular stuff, and then you get into some crazy stuff.
And acting out.
You ever gotten violent with it?
Yeah.
What were you doing?
Like she would pretend like she's getting raped, and I'd pretend like I'm raping her. That's from porn.
When we hear the word addiction, we usually associate it with a substance like alcohol or drugs. Yet pornography, even though not an ingestible substance like cocaine, seems to be used by many people in a compulsive drug-like way. In fact, many pornography addicts exhibit the same symptoms as drug addicts, such as tolerance, the need to have a harder and harder dose, dependence, becoming dependent on your drug of choice, and withdrawal, the feeling of physical pain when you are without the drug. All of these painful symptoms seem to promote out-of-control behavior as the addict tries to manage his addiction. But how can pornography, something that is not ingested in the body like a drug, be addictive?
How can certain activities that do not involve a drug, like skydiving, eating, or sex, cause such a high or mood alteration? What we realized in the early 70s, when endorphins were just being discovered, was that the capability to get high lies naturally within all our brains. We now understand that non-drug related activities or experiences can stimulate similar chemical reactions inside the brain that mimic the action of drugs.
The key to understanding how all highs occur is understanding how natural chemicals in our brain work. These natural chemicals are called neurotransmitters. One of the more well-known neurotransmitters are endorphins. Neurotransmitters are produced inside the many billions of brain cells, stimulated by electrical impulses from the nucleus of their home cell. Neurotransmitters are released into the synapse. It is these natural chemicals that are responsible for all highs and mood alterations. Even when drugs are taken, it is still these natural chemicals that are responsible for the high. Drugs only create a situation for these neurochemicals to overstimulate. Activities or events can also stimulate the release of these neurochemicals. The excitement and danger of risk-taking cause the natural release of the neurotransmitter dopamine into the synapse, creating the same high as cocaine. The phrase adrenaline junkie is actually quite appropriate. The pain and stress involved in bodybuilding causes the natural release of neurotransmitters called endorphins, creating a sense of euphoria and relaxation similar to the effects of morphine or heroin. The pornography experience also triggers the release of powerful mood-altering neurotransmitters.
The elements of addiction that we've worked with over the past 20 years that compel people to repeatedly engage in compulsive pleasure-seeking activities are arousal, relaxation, and fantasy. Now, of all the tools for addiction, drugs, gambling, skydiving, and television, sex addiction seems to combine these elements with more frequency and more intensity than any of the other activities. While looking at pornographic imagery, excitatory neurotransmitters are released into the synapse causing the body to become extremely energized, just like the high of cocaine.
It gave me like an adrenaline rush, like I was doing speed or something.
It feels like this incredible charge of life flowing through my veins.
It was like getting a rush in the arm of adrenaline.
At the height of this energized state, orgasm occurs, causing the release of endorphins, which create relaxation and euphoria. So right there in the pornographic experience, we have a synthesis of arousal, relaxation, and fantasy, unparalleled in any of the other addictions.
We now understand that the pornography experience can trigger natural neurochemicals in the brain, just as powerfully or perhaps even more powerfully than the drug experience. Let's go back into the brain to see how a physical addiction to pornography can be created by the overstimulation of these neurochemicals. The brain has a built-in neurochemical feedback mechanism that works against dramatic mood alterations. As soon as a mood alteration takes place, the brain goes into action to stabilize the mood and restore baseline neurotransmission. Over time, as the user continues to indulge in the pornography experience, the brain reacts by producing less and deactivating more neurotransmitters. The delicate level of neurotransmission that produces a normal mood is now altered and has become dysfunctional. It's this dysfunctional level of neurotransmission that causes the uncomfortable symptoms of physical addiction: tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal. Because there are now less neurotransmitters in the system, it takes a harder, perhaps more violent form of pornography to achieve the same sexual arousal. Just like a drug addict needing a larger dose to get high. This is tolerance. Because the dysfunctional rate of neurotransmission is uncomfortable, the addict uses pornography to bring it to a normal level. He is dependent on it, just like an addict becomes dependent on a drug. If he tries to quit using pornography, he will experience actual physical discomfort. Again, just like a drug addict. This is withdrawal.
Sex addicts also have a withdrawal experience. In other words, physically there is a withdrawal experience. It's different than, say, alcoholics who experience a withdrawal that happens in about 3 days. And it's very intense and then you dry out. It is much more like what happens with cocaine addicts.
The withdrawal was very hard. It came on very fast and it was very brutal. I experienced withdrawal that I had never experienced from drugs or alcohol.
When I stopped looking at pornography, it was hard. It was like a heroin addict trying to quit cold turkey.
One of the things that occurs is they have extreme insomnia. If they really try to stop, their body then starts to resist this.
Did you feel like when you had to stop pornography, was it like withdrawal?
Yeah, it was definitely withdrawal for me. And then I was depressed. I wouldn't talk to my friends and stuff. I was going crazy, you know?
One of the more fascinating things to me as I talk with sex addicts is that cocaine is one of the drugs of choice of sex addicts.
Another aspect of the pornography experience that adds to the addictive nature is the extreme emotional low or shame that directly follows the intense arousal. It's these two emotional extremes that create the addictive cycle. The high is followed by a low. The low is so painful that the user is easily tempted into pornography use, again, to escape the pain. With each use, the addict becomes more emotionally dependent on pornography to feel good. This is called psychological addiction. The cycle is also common in drug addiction. However, the sexual addictions seem to stimulate a much more devastating sense of shame that can cause extreme emotional trauma.
Steve? The problem with shame in these sexual addiction and pornography addictions is that it has a very powerful, crippling effect upon the man. And in fact, what it does is it pulls him deeper into the addiction. And the more he indulges his appetite, the more he feels ashamed about it and degraded and abased. And the more that makes him vulnerable to go out and do it again. So it's kind of like a spiraling circle that goes down, down, down.
That shame breaks the bridges you have with everyone around you, spouse, family, children, friends, people at work. And the result of it is that you become more and more isolated.
I felt so empty. I felt so alone.
When is it?
One of the things you'll frequently hear them say is, I couldn't talk to anybody about what was really going on inside of me.
You don't dare talk to people about it. It's something you're so ashamed of you won't tell your best friend.
We're talking here about something that literally catapults people into an abyss of pain.
I know I've been to the point where I was almost tempted to just do away with myself because I couldn't see any way out.
The only way I knew out was to end my life, and I looked forward to that.
And the only relief you have is the addiction.
Pornography ultimately is a manual on gender, how to be masculine and how to be feminine.
The stories and stuff that were in the magazines, there were stories, you know, little byline stories and stuff like that about how she likes this and how she wants this and how good it was to her.
They're aroused by that stuff.
And I got hooked on that. I got to thinking that it was true. I got to believing that it was true.
I think in our culture, where there's very little open and honest talk about sex in any way that highlights the power dynamics of heterosexuality and of gender, what happens is pornography comes in and fills a vacuum, and I think it does teach important lessons about how to be male and what to expect from women.
When you look at pornography, do you learn anything about women? Do you learn about sex? What do you learn?
Definitely, you learn. I mean, sometimes you'll be a little bit passive, but then a lot of women like you to be aggressive. So you learn new techniques, maybe try to be a little more aggressive with the girl when you have her in the bedroom.
Pornography delivers an image of masculinity that is dominant, that is removed from emotion, that is removed from any moral decision.
What do I learn from pornography? I learned to do it now. I learned to have no inhibitions about it. You know what I'm saying? I learned to be free.
Pornography portrays women as things to be penetrated. That's what women are in pornography, very clearly. And I think what men learn from that, or rather what they're relearning again and again from all the images, and especially through pornography, is that women exist for male use.
Pornography taught me over the years that that women were sluts, that they were a sex object, they were just to be used sexually.
What have you learned about women?
That they want sex more than they admit, that they want to have sex all the time.
There's nothing human about her. Everything that makes human beings human is stripped away in pornography. And in its place, men are delivered a pair of breasts, a vagina, an anus, and every orifice that you can imagine that a penis can be stuck into.
I learned doggy style. I learned how to, do the clit. I know how to work it. I know all that stuff, front ways, sideways, in the back. All the good stuff.
And that's what pornography is very good at doing. It's good at stripping away the humanity of women and delivering this object to a man.
I grew up on pornography as a young kid, like 13, 14 years old, and I discovered new things about women through pornography. It was an educational experience, I would have to say.
The most common characteristic or principle promoted by hardcore pornography is that women love to be raped. They enjoy it. They say no, but they mean yes. They say no, but if you'll force yourself, they will ultimately yield to you, and when they do, they will enjoy it, and they'll enjoy it so much that they'll finally plead for more.
Legally, he raped her, but she wanted to be raped. Women today, they just give it up when they get drunk.
They want to give it up. They want to give it up.
Do you think someone likes it? Some women enjoy being raped?
Let me tell you about women.
No, women do not enjoy to be raped. Not rape, but they want to be forcibly. They There's want their hair pulled on. They want to be human. They want to be.
They want that front that they're raped, but they know they're not being raped because they want it.
They know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
You're right.
These
These
guys are absolutely right. That's why I wanted to come over here.
I think pornography can desensitize viewers, for instance, to women's pain.
When you look at pornography, do you become less sensitive to women?
Yeah, that's true. That's the good point right there. You want to degrade them, man.
That it's easy to become much less aware of what, if you're in a sexual relationship with a partner, what may be pleasurable or painful to her.
Manhandle them, come on, like that.
If you have seen a pornographic world in which the repeated violation of women not only is taken to be sexually pleasurable for a man, but one of the things pornography does is it constructs these activities as pleasurable for women.
What have you learned from looking at pornography? What have you learned about women?
They're horny. They're very horny.
One of the interesting things about pornography is that everything that happens in pornography is depicted as being sexually satisfying to a woman. So if a woman is performing oral sex on a man, it's depicted as giving her sexual satisfaction. Women are almost orgasmic continuously through pornography. Whatever a man does to her, whatever she does to herself, whatever she does for a man, all of it creates sexual pleasure for women in pornography. That's the way the pornographic world works.
Let me tell you this, women want it more than men.
They don't show it more than men, they want it more than women.
And I think if you watch that repeatedly, it cultivates an attitude in which it's, I think, very easy to lose track of in a real life sexual relationship with a real woman what that woman is feeling.
Can pornography make you harsher or less?
It makes you very rough. It makes you very, very rough. It can thrust you out. It makes you...
It can, I think, dull your sensitivity to the pain and the pleasure of a partner.
Have you ever done anything just sort of over the top that when you were looking at it?
Nah. That's about it.
Forcefully?
Huh?
Did you force it? Did you force her to do it?
Yes, I did. You can say that. Yeah.
I think that what is true is that the pornography itself is so brutalizing and so desensitizing that once you are convinced, not just intellectually, but in subconscious ways that you don't even know about, that a woman's life is not worth what your life is worth. Once you think that she's less valuable than you are as a human being, that is a key that opens a door to doing all kinds of things to her that you would never do to somebody that you thought was a human being.
When I was 16 years old, I kidnapped a 7-year-old girl from a mall at knife point and kidnapped her from the mall and sexually assaulted her on a mountain road outside of town. Pornography played a big part in the attitude I had towards females, women, girls in general. They weren't human. They're there for men's gratification and they serve no other purpose in life. There's nothing human about them. I didn't know how to relate to women other than the ways I had seen men relate to them in movies and magazines. I had no social skills beyond that. I abducted the girl from the mall because she was smaller and I knew I could force her into doing what I wanted. Pornography erodes away anything moral about people.
And what pornography does is it sexualizes violence against women. And when you sexualize violence against women, you render the violence invisible.
Like with hardcore stuff on the internet, do you ever say, hey, that's violent?
No, not at all. No violence at all.
And that's what pornography does really, really well, which is why you will sometimes have violent images and it's hard for men to see the violence because it is so highly sexualized.
Some people say there's a lot of violence in pornography.
No, it's not because how you like it. It all depends on how you. If you like something violent, if it turns you on, then you like it. But if it's not you, then it's not you.
Is that bad for men to be turned on to violence?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
And it gets delivered and experienced in a sexual way, and that violence is therefore rendered invisible.
In my experience, pornography conditioned many appetites in me that I didn't have. I don't believe that I had these appetites before they were fed and watered and by pornography.
I think that it is the nature of pornography that it takes men from who they are to being somebody different, that it teaches them to feel pleasure in areas that they would not have explored on their own.
Has it turned you on to other types of sex?
Definitely.
Like what?
More aggressive. A lot more aggressive.
I don't think that it's true that you have to have a pre-existing tendency to hurt women or to be sadistic.
Sure, I'd fantasized about raping. You know, I'd seen a few films with my friends, and they were pretty violent acts in these films. And it got me sexually aroused to watch these acts, and the women were being beaten, raped, tied up, raped, sodomized, and I found myself getting sexually aroused by that. Had I not seen that them films, I don't know how I would be today.
And when I went on to do a PhD in studying media and its effects, I began to see that all that was being said about media in terms of its effects and the way it's constructed our notions of reality could also be applied to pornography. And in fact, in a more powerful way, because you watch media and you masturbate to pornography.
Pornography just kind of satisfies a lot of male fantasies.
And do you masturbate after you look at pornography?
Hell yeah, if I'm watching pornography, it's usually for the purpose of masturbation.
And so what happens is that pornography and the images in pornography, I think, get encoded into the ways that men think about themselves as male and as masculine.
Every time I masturbate, whether I use pornography or not, it reinforces anything I might be thinking about at that time. If I'm thinking about an adult woman, then it helps me to objectify him. If I'm thinking about a kid, it not only helps me to objectify him, but it makes it all right for me to go out and molest children or rape women.
This is the way many sexual deviations are created, through what we call masturbatory conditioning.
To be honest, it has opened me up for a couple of more kinky areas as far as sex is concerned, bondage, anal sex, a little of the rougher sex, choking, slapping, some of the stuff that you play around with, but that tends to get a little serious. Masturbation sort of opens that all the way up.
As masturbating to either something that you see or the memory of something that you've seen before, which is very pornographic. And if this involves, for example, say a rape of a woman, and this has been very exciting and you retain it on your mind screen with the help of that epinephrine, that chemical there that locks it in, then it'd be very easy to keep recalling that and masturbating to that. And what you're doing in a sense is conditioning yourself into sexual illness, and that is having a sexual deviation or preference.
When I masturbate, those images that I masturbate to is what determines what I'm going to go out and do.
When there was an onslaught of pornography in the 60s, President Johnson established a commission to study its effects. After a 2-year investigation and spending several $1 million and interviewing social scientists from all over the world, they concluded that there was no evidence that exposure to this material is harmful to anyone. Now, the feminists and the religious right continue to make their age-old arguments without offering any kind of support for them at all.
I think that there is a cause and effect relationship between pornography and sexual abuse. This doesn't mean that pornography is the only cause of sexual abuse. It doesn't mean that every rape or every act of battery is caused by pornography. What it does mean is that there are acts of rape, acts of battery, acts of violence against women that would not happen were it not for the effect of pornography on the perpetrator.
I interviewed a man who was convicted of sexually abusing girls on the bus that he drove. And what he told me is that he would often go home at night and watch the pornographic movies and look at the magazines and fantasize about the girls who he drove to school on the bus. And then he would go to work the next morning and drive the bus and look at the young girls and then fantasize about them in the context of pornography. And he talked about the way in which his fantasy life and his real sexual behavior began to blur a bit. Again, he didn't blame pornography for making him do what he did. He was able to reflect on the way in which pornography constructed a world in which sexually abusing young girls became possible for him.
Guys will say violence is bad, men's violence against women is a bad thing. I don't agree. We shouldn't have all this rape. We shouldn't have all this battering, and it's a bad thing, and they'll agree. Okay, so we get a consensus. But then we'll say, okay, can we look at some of the institutions in the society that might lead to these enormous rates of violence? Okay, in other words, the violence doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's not some genetic thing. It's not some biological thing. And anybody who thinks that it's genetic or biological, all you have to do is point to other societies which have much, much lower rates of sexual assault.
Pornography doesn't instigate, provoke, or provide insanity.
When you start bringing them up and saying, okay, let's look at the media, let's look at pornography, let's look maybe at the sports culture. In each of those cases, when you start bringing these things up, guys who just 5 minutes before had said, yeah, we think that rape and battering and sexual harassment are bad things and we should do something about them. The same guys often are then saying, wait a second, it's not about pornography, it's not the issue.
Pornography leads to violence against women. How would you respond to that?
That bugs me. That bugs me. It doesn't.
And then they start oftentimes resorting to things like, the men who do these things are crazy.
There's crazy people. Not everybody's saying there's crazy people. The crazy people, they're crazy, and they're going to do whatever they want because they're crazy.
If that was true, what that means is that our society is absolutely crazy, because that means that there's millions of men walking around who are crazy, because there's so many men walking around who are assaulting women or who have assaulted women.
You have to be a sicko to begin with. It doesn't matter if you've got pornography or not. I mean, if you're that sick, you're seeing pornography in your vision.
It's not helpful or useful at all to think of this in terms of crazy men going off and doing these things. I think the men who commit these crimes are a lot more normal than they are crazy.
What's wrong?
It's much easier to think that it's Freddy Krueger, it's some sicko who's out there creating the violence and attacking girls and women. But in fact, it's not true. The average rapist looks like me, or looks like any other guy.
The way pornography related to my conviction, it's just a progression. I mean, it starts out with the age, and the age just starts decreasing, and you start looking for different physical characteristics, and had a lot to do with it. It jumped me right into a cycle. Just started a whole trigger of events for me. And I planned out to be left alone with the 10-year-old stepdaughter. Her mom took off to church, and I stayed home that night, and I coerced her into performing oral sex on me. To sum it up, basically, I raped her. All I can speak for is myself, and I know that it wasn't good for me. I lived a good life being raised. I lived a religious background. I know what it did for me, and it did not help. It derailed my life.
The argument that there is no proof that pornography causes violence is really wrong, and the proof exists in many different areas. There have been a great many scientific studies in university laboratory situations exposing men to pornography and then measuring their changes of attitudes, their reactions, their willingness to rape, their willingness to commit acts of aggression against women. I mean, this research has been going on a very long time, and virtually all of it shows that with what these researchers call aggressive pornography, by which they sometimes mean pornography that is violent, and they sometimes mean pornography that is simply brutal, that men's attitudes towards women and their willingness to commit acts of violence against women changed to the point where they are more willing to do things that were unthinkable to them before they were exposed to the pornography. There's another area of information that is always treated with incredible condescension and trivialization. It's called anecdotal evidence, and that means that it actually happened to somebody and they know about it and they will tell you about it.
My father began abusing me sexually when I was 5. I checked that out with him a few years ago. He told me that it began around then too. He'd come home often with pictures of women in sexual situations with other women, other men, or animals. I was abused by him until I was 13 years old. And what I realized from my own personal life experience and the personal life experience of many, many, many other women and men that I've talked to, there's no question in my mind that pornography and sexual abuse and sexual assault, that there's a strong connection. I watched my own father become aroused and get excited by the pornography and then act out on what he was looking at.
Here, let me show you some of the other ones.
The police actually have a lot of proof. The FBI, police in various areas.
Oftentimes when we do investigations involving individuals who target children for sexual purposes, we do search warrants and find various kinds of pornography in their residence or hidden away at some other location.
On September 4th, 1998, I was assigned as the lead investigator in the homicide of Elizabeth Sinclair. Elizabeth was 5 years old and she was strangled to death by her 17-year-old babysitter, David Case. In the investigation, we learned that David Case had over 700 sexually explicit images that he had downloaded off the internet.
Elizabeth was my 5-year-old daughter who was raped, sodomized, and then strangled by her 17-year-old babysitter who was a friend of the family. We had known him since he was 3 years old. I think probably one of the biggest contributing factors to what happened was through the course of the investigation, they found out that he was real heavy into child pornography and other forms of pornography.
In David Case obtaining the photograph of the victim, Elizabeth, and placing it in with other hardcore pornography, child pornography pictures, he began fantasizing her. He was placing her in the same category as these other photographs, so he was fantasizing about committing those acts with Elizabeth at that time. So I truly believe that if pornography wasn't involved, if David didn't have access to it or the free access through the internet to the pornography, there's a good chance that this homicide would not have occurred.
It's very striking that pornography is a part of so many of these crime scenes that the police find. And then finally, I think this is very important, we actually have the testimony of lots of men who have committed sexual abuse.
What had happened is I had been looking at pornography and thinking about pornography, and I was walking across the college campus, and I seen this lady pull up and park her car. So I got in her car and hid out in the back of her car, and then when she came back out, I came up over the back seat and put a knife to her throat. I had these images in my mind of the girls that I had seen in the magazines, and I forced this woman to perform oral sex on me, which I had seen being done in the magazines. I had a real vivid image of the girls had smiles on their faces and stuff like that. And when, even though the woman that I was raping was crying, to me, I had these pictures implanted in my mind, and I didn't see the pain and the anger and the hate that I was putting her through. All I could see was these smiling faces.
There's more current research that shows that even the pornography that doesn't involve violence, not the so-called aggressive pornography, but the objectifying pornography, the Playboy and Penthouse kind of pornography, that also changes men's attitudes in a very negative way towards women and their willingness to act out violence on women.
It wasn't really hardcore pornography, but it was, I think it was like Penthouse. I remember I was trying to get my victims to enjoy it like I was. Give them the mindset, well, look how good this is. Doesn't this look good? I felt like it gave me a little bit more ability to do a little more explicit acts with my victims than if I wouldn't have had it. To prolong the assault, yeah, I remember that. That it did prolong a lot of the assaults.
I'll bring them over and we can look at them.
It made it more intense.
Think you'd like that?
A lot more intense. It made it more violent too. Violent in the way I didn't care. I didn't care what I did to anybody.
We know from research in 12 cities all across America that the sex crimes and violent crimes increase significantly in the area where these sex shops go in, adult bookstores, X-rated theaters, etc. Violent crime in America against women is at epidemic proportions. The molestation rate of children is at epidemic proportions.
My brother-in-law always had pornographic books. He always had the magazines. He would show both myself, my sister, these dirty books of men and women having sex. He was always at the adult bookstores. And I believe he was looking at these things every single day. It's like every female in our family wasn't safe around him. He was addicted to the pornography, and I think this is why he was so perpetual in his victimizing everybody. I think that my brother-in-law thought I was equivalent or would respond in the same way that the women on the pages of the pornographic magazines, the way that they looked, that they were erotic or aroused or enjoyed it. And I think he firmly believed that I welcomed his advances towards me, that I wanted him to touch me, that I would really enjoy it once he was able to get his hands on me.
It's clear that the most disturbing issue of pornography has to be its long-term effect on society. And if you think that pornography is too prevalent now, well, just wait. Virtual reality, digital delivery systems, interactive TV, they are all on the horizon. Currently, we have millions of young men consuming hardcore pornography on a daily basis. As they get older, how is this going to affect their relationships with women? And the larger question, how will it affect the community? What will the future hold for women who are raised in a society where they are dehumanized by a multi-billion-dollar pornography industry? An industry that portrays them as sexually aroused by humiliation, exploitation, and molestation.
As a child, I just hid out inside myself. And what that meant was, in school, my entire grade school experience was about trying not to be seen. I remember being on the playground, for example, and watching other children playing, but I couldn't really play. Just couldn't play. The assumption for me, and I'm not alone, is that I was so bad, I was so tainted, that I couldn't let anybody know.
As a society, we have yet to reach a consensus regarding the effects of pornography, or what we should do about it. On the other hand, the pornography industry isn't waiting around for our verdict. They will continue to mainstream their products into our communities. They will continue to wield more social and political power with their enormous profits. They will continue to disavow any responsibilities for harm caused by their actions. And they will continue to profit from the dehumanization of women and children. Already 1 out of every 4 women are sexually abused by the age of 20. What's that worth? What are the consequences if we continue to allow pornography to saturate our communities and influence